The first kick caught Ava on her side and she went down hard. Her hands hit the floor first, trying to protect her stomach. Sujin didn't stop. She stepped over her, then stepped back, her heel coming down on Ava's ankle. One of the women in the group laughed. Ava was saying something, repeating one word, over and over. And it took a moment to understand what she was saying. She was saying please.
Please.
She was saying it to the crowd.
I'm still
Not to
angry at
Sujin.
you.
She had already stopped expecting anything from Sujin. She was begging strangers. And the strangers just watched. Hello besties. Welcome to Afro-Korean Tales. Please like, share and subscribe. Comment what time you are watching and also turn on the notification button, so you won't miss out on more intense stories like this. My name is Ji-hun Kwon. And before I tell you everything that happened, I want you to understand one thing clearly. I am not a man who loses control. I was raised in two countries, by two very different cultures, and the one thing both of them agreed on was that a man who cannot control himself is a man who cannot be trusted. My Nigerian father said it in Yoruba. My Korean mother said it in Korean. Different languages, same lesson. So when everything fell apart, I did not scream. I did not break things. I did not make threats in the heat of the moment. I waited. I thought. And then I moved. This story is about what happened when I moved. But let me start from the beginning. Because you need to understand what we had before you can understand what they tried to destroy. Ji-hun Kwon was born in Lagos, Nigeria, on a Tuesday morning in October, to a Yoruba father named Adewale Kwon and a Korean mother named Kwon Sunja. His father was a civil engineer who had gone to Seoul for a construction project and never left. His mother was a woman from Busan who had fallen in love with a man her family spent 3 years trying to talk her out of. They did not succeed. Adewale and Sunja got married in a small ceremony that neither family fully attended, moved to Lagos, and built a life that was entirely their own. Ji-hun grew up between two worlds and fully belonged to neither. In Lagos, the neighborhood children called him the Korean boy. In Seoul, where he spent summers with his maternal grandparents, he was the African boy. He had his father's dark brown skin and broad shoulders, and his mother's monolid eyes and sharp cheekbones. He kept his hair in locks that he tied back when he was working and let fall loose on weekends. By the time he was 25, he had stopped trying to fit neatly into either identity, and had simply become himself. A man who ate jollof rice and kimchi at the same table, without finding anything strange about it. A man who switched between Yoruba, Korean, and English in a single conversation depending on who he was talking to. A man who had learned very early that the world would always try to put him in a box, and that the best response was to simply refuse the box. He met Ava Williams at a mutual friend's dinner party in Seoul. She was there because her company had transferred her to their Seoul office for a 2-year contract. She was from Atlanta, Georgia, had natural hair that she wore in a big puff that evening, and was the only person at the party who was not trying to impress anyone. Everyone else at that dinner was performing in some way. Ava was just sitting, eating her food, asking genuine questions, and laughing at things that were actually funny. Ji-hun sat across from her, and within 20 minutes of conversation, he understood that she was the most straightforward person he had ever met. She was not immediately interested in him. That was the other thing. Ji-hun was used to people being curious about him, his mix, his background, his story. Ava was polite, but she was not fascinated by him in that way that sometimes made him feel like an exhibit. She treated him like a regular person who she was deciding whether or not she liked. He found that so refreshing that he asked for her number before the dinner was over. They dated for 8 months before he asked her to stay in Seoul when her contract ended. She said she needed to think about it. She thought about it for 2 weeks and then came back and said yes. They got married the following year in a small ceremony with close friends. His uncle Deo flew in from Lagos and cried through the entire ceremony. Ava's mother flew in from Atlanta and gave a speech that made everyone in the room laugh, and then immediately tear up. It was a good day. It was a genuinely good day. The problems did not start on their wedding day. They had been there before the wedding, quiet and patient, waiting. Madame Kwon, Ji-hun's mother, had never been openly hostile to Ava. That was not her style. She was too controlled for open hostility. What she did was much quieter, and in many ways much harder to confront. She forgot Ava's name regularly, referring to her as that girl, or your wife, even after 2 years of marriage. She asked questions about the baby in ways that somehow excluded Ava from the conversation entirely. directing everything at Jihan as though Ava were a vessel rather than a person. She sent gifts with cards that said for my grandchild, but never said for my daughter-in-law. She invited Jihan to family events and added Ava's name as an afterthought, a small comma after his, like she was a +1 to her own family membership. Jihan had confronted his mother about this twice. Both times Madame Kwan had looked at him with that sharp, composed expression she wore like armor, and said she didn't know what he was talking about. That she had nothing against Ava. That she simply wanted what was best for her son. Both times Jihan had walked away from the conversation feeling like he had been speaking into a wall. Ava never complained directly. That was her way. She processed things internally, talked to her mother on video calls late at night when she thought Jihan was asleep, and kept showing up to family events with her chin up and her smile genuine. Jihan watched her do this and loved her for it, and also felt quietly guilty that she had to do it at all. Uncle Deo was the exception. Adewale's younger brother had moved to Seoul 6 years earlier to run a trading business, and had become a permanent fixture in Jihan's life. He was a large man, dark-skinned, with a gold tooth that flashed when he laughed, and he laughed constantly. He called Ava my daughter from their first meeting. He showed up to their apartment with Nigerian groceries. He taught her how to make egusi soup, and when she got it right on the third attempt he grabbed her by the shoulders and announced to the empty kitchen that she was officially more Nigerian than half of Lagos. Ava adored him completely. The morning of the mall incident started like any other Saturday. Jihan had an emergency call with a client that came in at 9 in the morning. He was a project coordinator for a construction firm, and one of their sites had hit a problem that needed his attention. He took the call at his desk in the spare room while Ava got dressed in their bedroom. At some point she knocked on the door, opened it, and leaned against the frame. She was wearing a yellow dress. It was loose and comfortable, the kind of thing she had been buying more of as her pregnancy progressed, but it was bright and it suited her and she looked beautiful in it. She was 7 months along. The pregnancy was showing fully and she carried it with the kind of ease that made Jihan's chest hurt with something he could not name, but was very close to pure gratitude. She held up her phone and pointed at it, mouthing, "I'm going out." He nodded and gave her a thumbs up. She pointed at her stomach and mouthed something else. He pulled down his headset and said, "What?" She said, "Your baby and I are going shopping. Don't miss us too much." He laughed quietly so as not to disturb the call, and waved her off. She blew him a kiss at the door and left. That was the last normal moment they had for a very long time. The mall she went to was about 20 minutes from their apartment by subway. It was a large place for floors busy on weekends. She had been there many times. She knew the layout, knew which floors had the baby section she liked, knew which food court stall sold the sweet potato latte she had been craving for 2 weeks. It was a familiar, comfortable place for her. She had no reason to feel unsafe there. Soojin arrived at the mall 40 minutes after Ava. Park Soojin was 32 years old, and had known Jihan's mother for 6 years. She had started as a family acquaintance, the daughter of one of Madame Kwan's church friends, and had slowly made herself indispensable to Madame Kwan in the way that certain people do. She was always available, always willing, always present at family gatherings where she had no direct reason to be. She was the kind of woman who collected influence by making herself useful to powerful people, and Madame Kwan, in her small but precise social circle, was a powerful person. Soojin had made her feelings about Ava known in private on multiple occasions. In group chats Jihan was not part of. In conversations at family dinners when Ava had stepped away from the table, she never said anything that could be directly quoted back to her. She was too careful for that. But the shape of what she thought was clear to everyone who knew her. She arrived at the mall that Saturday with 2 women. Both of them were in her social circle, both of them knew who Ava was, and both of them knew exactly why they were there. Ava was on the 3rd floor, in the baby section, looking at a rack of tiny onesies when she noticed them. She didn't know Soojin personally. She had seen her twice at family gatherings, exchanged brief, polite nothings with her, and moved on. She did not register her presence as a threat. Why would she? She was in a mall. She was shopping. She was 7 months pregnant, and her feet were starting to hurt, and she was thinking about the sweet potato latte she was going to get in 20 minutes. What happened next happened in under 2 minutes. Soojin walked past the rack where Ava was standing and knocked the items out of her hands. Not with her shoulder in a crowded aisle accident. She stopped, turned, and used her forearm deliberately. The onesies Ava had been holding went to the floor. Ava looked up. The two women with Sujin were already watching, already positioned, and there was something about the formation of them, the deliberate spread of their bodies, the way they were blocking the narrow aisle, that made Ava's stomach drop before anything else happened. She bent to pick up the onesies. When she straightened up, Sujin was right in front of her. She said something. Her voice was low and her Korean was fast and sharp, and Ava's Korean was conversational. Enough for daily life, but Sujin was speaking in a register that was deliberately difficult, clipping her words in a way that was designed to be hard to follow. Ava caught pieces of it. She caught the word for leave. She caught a phrase that translated roughly to "this is not your place." She caught the word that in Korean is used for someone who does not belong. Ava straightened her shoulders. Later, when she told Ji-hun this part, she said she made a decision in that moment to simply walk away. She did not want a confrontation. She was 7 months pregnant in a mall, and she had a sweet potato latte waiting for her downstairs, and she did not have the energy or the desire to stand in a baby aisle and argue with a woman she barely knew. She said, "Excuse me," in Korean, clear and polite, and she tried to move past. Sujin stepped in front of her. Ava stopped. She looked at her. She said, "Please move." One of the other women said something that made the third woman laugh, and then Sujin pushed her. It was not a stumble-inducing tap. It was a hard, two-handed push to Ava's chest that sent her stumbling backward. Her heel caught the edge of a low display shelf, and she went down. She went down hard and fast, and her hands hit the polished mall floor first, trying to protect her stomach, and the impact sent a shock up both arms that she felt in her teeth. She was on the floor of the mall, 7 months pregnant, in a yellow dress, with baby onesies scattered around her. The first kick caught her on her side and she cried out. She had barely processed being on the floor before it happened. Sujin had moved to her side with a speed that suggested she had decided what she was going to do before Ava had even fallen. The kick was hard and it landed on the soft part of Ava's left side, and the pain was immediate and blinding. Ava's hands went to her stomach. That was instinct, pure and complete. Whatever happened to her, her hands were going to her stomach. She said please. The first time quietly, more of a breath than a word. She was looking up at the ceiling of the mall and her vision was slightly unsteady and she could hear the sounds of the floor around her. Other shoppers, music from a nearby store, the background noise of a busy Saturday, and none of it was stopping. Sujin stepped over her. Then I stepped back. Her heel came down on Ava's ankle with her full weight behind it, and Ava made a sound that was not a scream and not a word. It was something more basic than either of those things. One of the women in the group laughed. A short, sharp sound. Ava turned her head and looked at the people standing in the aisle. There were at least 15 people visible from where she was lying. Shoppers. Families. A teenage boy with headphones. A woman with a stroller. An older man in a brown jacket. She looked at their faces one by one from the floor, and what she saw in most of them was not cruelty. It was something worse. I hesitated. The particular human calculation of people deciding whether something was their business. She said please again. This time louder. This time to them. Not to Sujin. She had already understood that there was nothing to ask from Sujin. She was asking the crowd. She was a pregnant woman on the floor of a mall asking strangers to help her. Sujin crouched down. She got close to Ava's face. She said something quietly, something that only Ava could hear, and whatever it was made Ava close her eyes for a moment. Then Sujin stood, straightened her jacket, looked around at the watching crowd with an expression of complete composure, and walked away. The two women with her followed without looking back. The crowd stood there for another few seconds. Then a woman, not Korean, West African by her clothing and accent, a Nigerian woman as it turned out, named Blessing, who had been buying children's shoes 2 aisles over and heard the sound of Ava hitting the floor, came around the corner at a fast walk, saw Ava on the ground, and dropped to her knees immediately. She said, "Oh God. Oh God, are you okay? Are you okay? Don't move, let me look at you." Ava looked at her and said, "My baby." Blessing put her hand gently on Ava's stomach and said, I'm here. You're going to be okay. I'm calling for help right now." The teenage boy with the headphones had already taken them off and was on the phone. The woman with the stroller had moved closer. The older man in the brown jacket had finally moved toward her. but Sujin and her group were already gone. Park Min-jae, the security guard whose post was at the end of that corridor, had been there for part of it. He had seen enough to know what was happening. He had made a choice in real time to turn and walk in the other direction. He had a reason for that choice, and that reason would come out later. And it would connect to a name that Ji-hun was not ready to hear yet. Blessing stayed with Ava until the ambulance came. She went through Ava's phone, found Ji-hun's contact saved as my person, with a small yellow heart next to it, and called him. Ji-hun was still on his work call when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again immediately. He frowned, excused himself briefly from the call, and picked up. A woman's voice said, "Is this Ji-hun? I'm calling about your wife. She needs you to come to the hospital right now. She's okay, the baby is okay, but she needs you to come now. I'm with her. My name is Blessing. Please come." Ji-hun stood up from his desk, so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He told his colleague he had a family emergency, grabbed his jacket and keys, and was out of the apartment in under 4 minutes. He drove to the hospital because it was faster than the subway, and he ran 2 red lights on the way and did not care even slightly. When he walked into the emergency ward and gave Ava's name at the desk, and was directed down a corridor to a room, he prepared himself for what he might see. He told himself to be calm. He told himself that Blessing had said she was okay. He told himself to breathe. He was not prepared. Ava was sitting up in the hospital bed. She was still in the yellow dress, or what remained of its dignity, because the left side of it was torn at the hip where she had hit the floor. Her knees were bandaged. Her left ankle was wrapped. There was bruising on her forearm that was already turning dark. She was connected to a fetal monitor, and the sound of the baby's heartbeat was filling the small room with its steady rhythm. And she was holding her own hands in her lap. And when Ji-hun came through the door, she looked at him, and her face did the thing it did when she was trying very hard not to cry in front of someone she loved. He crossed the room in 3 steps and sat on the edge of the bed, and put his arms around her as carefully as he could, the way you hold something that has been hurt. She leaned her head against his chest. The fetal monitor kept going. Steady. Persistent. Their baby's heartbeat filling the silence between them. He did not ask questions yet. He just held her. Blessing was sitting in the chair in the corner of the room. She was a full woman in her 40s, dark-skinned, with a head wrap in green and gold. And she had the expression of someone who had seen something they were still processing. When Ji-hun looked up at her over Ava's head, she met his eyes steadily and gave him a small nod that said more than any word she could have chosen. He mouthed, "Thank you." She nodded again. After a few minutes, Ava pulled back slightly and looked at him. She said, "The baby is okay. Dr. Yemi said the baby is okay." Ji-hun said, "Good. Good. And you?" She said, "I'm okay." He looked at the bruising on her arm. He looked at the wrapped ankle. He looked at the tear in her dress. He said, "Ava." She said, "I'm okay, Ji-hun." He said, "What happened?" She paused. She looked at the fetal monitor screen. She said, "I fell." And Ji-hun, who knew his wife's voice in every tone and register it was capable of, heard the thing she was not saying underneath the thing she said. He did not push it at that moment. She was in a hospital bed with her baby's heartbeat on a monitor, and whatever she needed from him in that moment was not interrogation. He said, "Okay." She leaned her head back against his chest. He stayed at the hospital for 6 hours. Dr. Yemi Adienka, Ava's doctor, was a Nigerian-Korean woman in her mid-30s with natural hair pulled back, wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular kind of calm that comes from years of delivering serious news without falling apart in front of patients. She checked in on Ava twice during those hours, and on the second check she asked Ji-hun to step into the corridor with her. He followed her out. She stood with her back to the wall, arms crossed lightly, and looked at him with an expression that he would remember for a long time. She said, "The baby's position is good and the heartbeat is strong. We want to keep her overnight for observation, but I'm not expecting complications from the baby's side." Ji-hun said, "Good. Thank you." Dr. Yemi said, "Mr. Kwan." She paused. "The injuries to your wife's left side and her ankle are not consistent with a fall." Ji-hun looked at her. She said, "The bruising pattern and the specific location of the impact points suggest direct external force, applied deliberately, more than once." Ji-hun stood very still. She said, "I'm not in a position to make a legal determination. That's not my role. But I want you to have accurate information about what I'm seeing clinically. He said, say it again. She said it again. Direct external force. Deliberately applied. More than once. He thanked her. He went back into the room. He sat in the chair beside Ava's bed. She had fallen into a light sleep, one hand resting on her stomach. The fetal monitor continued its steady sound. Ji-hun sat in that chair and stared at the wall in front of him. And in the 4 hours that followed while his wife slept, he became very, very quiet inside. Blessing left at some point in the evening. Before she went, she stopped next to Ji-hun's chair and said, quietly, so as not to wake Ava, I saw what happened. I didn't see it start, but I saw enough. She put a card on the armrest beside him. That's my number. If you need a witness, you call me. Ji-hun picked up the card. He looked at it. He said, why are you doing this? Blessing looked at Ava sleeping in the bed and then back at him. She said, because I have a daughter. And because somebody should have helped her sooner. She paused. They should be ashamed of themselves. All of them who just stood there. She left. Ji-hun held her card in his hand and stared at the floor. The next morning, Dr. Yemi cleared Ava to go home with instructions to rest, avoid stress, and come in immediately if she felt anything unusual. She helped Ava get her things together with a warmth and care that Ji-hun noticed and was grateful for. At the door of the room, Dr. Yemi caught Ji-hun's eye and held it for a second. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They took a taxi home. Ava sat with her head against the window and watched the city go by. Ji-hun sat next to her with his hand over hers in her lap. Neither of them spoke much. The city looked exactly the same as it always had, and Ji-hun found that strange. The way the world just kept going when something had shifted underneath it. Back at the apartment, he helped her to the couch. Made tea. Brought her the specific pillow she used to support her back. Put on the show she had been watching before all of this. Did all the ordinary things. And while he was doing those things, the question was sitting in the middle of the room between them, large and patient, waiting. He sat across from her. He said, Ava. She kept her eyes on the screen for a moment. Then she turned them to him. He said, you didn't fall. She looked at him for a long time. The show played behind her. Its sounds filling the room with a normalcy that felt almost offensive. Then she said, no. I didn't fall. Ji-hun nodded slowly. He said, tell me. She did. She told him all of it. Not quickly, not in a rush of emotion. Slowly and clearly, the way Ava did things, like she had already organized the information in her mind and decided what order to present it in. The woman at the rack. The push. The fall. The kicks. The heel on her ankle. The crowd watching. The words she kept saying. The things Sujin had said when she crouched down close to her face at the end. Ji-hun listened without moving. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted about 30 seconds. Then he said, who was she? Ava shook her head. I don't know her name. I've seen her before. At your family things. Twice maybe. Ji-hun said, describe her. Ava described her. Ji-hun's face didn't change. But something behind his eyes went very flat. He said, what did she say to you at the end? When she crouched down? Ava looked at him. She said, Ji-hun. He said, tell me. Ava said, she said you should have stayed in America where you belong. She said this family will never be yours. And then she said, she stopped. She looked at her hands. She said some things are stronger than whatever he feels for you. The room was completely quiet. Ji-hun stood up. He walked to the kitchen. He stood at the sink with his back to the room and his hands on the counter for about a minute. Ava watched him from the couch. She knew not to speak in these moments. She had learned the geography of his silences in 2 years of marriage. And this particular silence had a specific quality she had felt once before and had hoped never to feel again. He came back to the couch. He sat down. He put both of his hands over hers and he looked at her and said, I need you to hear me say something. She nodded. He said, whatever I'm about to do, I need you to know it's not more important than you and the baby. You are the first thing. You will always be the first thing. But I cannot let this go. Do you understand that? Ava looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I know. He said, are you okay with that? She said, I'm not asking you to let it go. He held her hands for another moment. Then he picked up his phone. The first call he made was to Chidi. Chidi Okafor had been Jihan's friend since they were both 12 years old. The year Jihan's family spent in Lagos before moving back to Seoul. They had grown up in a similar kind of in-between. Chidi was from a family that moved constantly for his father's work, and he had learned early how to read rooms and navigate situations, and figure out who the players were in any given environment. He was tall, dark-skinned, always in tracksuits regardless of the occasion. And he had a particular talent for finding information that people preferred to keep private. He also loved Ava like a sister, and when Jihan told him in flat, simple words what had happened, the line went so quiet for a moment that Jihan thought the call had dropped. Then Chidi said, "Give me the mall name and the time." Jihan gave it to him. Chidi said, "I'll call you back in 2 hours." He called back in 90 minutes. He said, "The mall has cameras on every floor. The third floor baby section has 2. The corridor outside it has 3. I have a contact who works in the security office of a building 2 blocks from that mall, and he knows the guys who monitor those cameras. One of them is willing to talk, but he wants to meet in person." Jihan said, "When?" Chidi said, "Tonight." "But Jihan." He paused. He said, "There's something else." He said the footage got flagged internally before anyone reported the incident. Someone inside that security system flagged it before Ava even left the building. Jihan said, "What does that mean?" Chidi said, "It means someone with access to those cameras, or someone who called someone with access to those cameras, knew about it while it was happening and made sure it went quiet." The line was silent. Jihan said, "I'll be ready at 8. Now here is where I need to stop for a moment and ask you something directly. If you are watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, I want you to think about Ava on that floor. Alone. With nobody coming. There are people watching this story right now who won't press that subscribe button, who won't share this video, who won't show up for this channel, and honestly, that's the same energy as standing in that mall corridor and doing nothing. This channel takes real time and real work to make, and all it takes from you is one tap. Subscribe. Share this video. Turn on notifications. Don't be the person who watched and walked away. They met the contact at a Pojangmaka near the river. He was a small man in his 40s, nervous eyes, kept looking over his shoulder. His name was Hyunwoo and he worked in IT maintenance for a security firm that contracted with several malls in the area. He slid a USB drive across the table without a preamble. He said, "Everything is on there. The full corridor footage from 12:17 to 12:31. 3 angles. You can see everything." Jihan picked up the drive. He said, "You said it was flagged internally." Hyunwoo nodded. He wrapped both hands around his drink. He said, "At 12:23, while the incident was still happening, someone called the internal line for our monitoring room. Not a customer complaint line, the internal staff line. The number is supposed to be known only to mall management and our own team." He paused. "The call came from a personal mobile. I ran the number. It's registered to a private individual." Jihan said, "What did the call say?" Hyunwoo said, "I wasn't in the room, but my colleague who took it told me later, off the record, that he was told not to archive the footage and not to involve security response." He looked at his drink. He didn't listen to all of it, but he said the person on the phone was calm. Very calm. Like they had expected to make this call. Jihan said, "The security guard. Park Min-jae." Hyunwoo looked at him. Jihan said, "He was in that corridor." He walked away. Hyunwoo nodded slowly. He said, "Min-jae used to work for a different company. Before this one." He paused. The previous company he worked for had a contract with a private family. I don't know the details, but I know that when he transferred to our firm, the recommendation letter came from a personal contact rather than a corporate one. That's unusual. Jihan said, "Whose contact?" Hyunwoo looked uncomfortable. He said, "I've told you everything I can tell you without losing my job." Chidi, who had been sitting quietly beside Jihan, leaned forward and said, "We're not asking you to go on record. We just need direction." Hyunwoo was quiet for a long time. He turned his drink in his hands. Then he said quietly, "The personal mobile that called our internal line. I didn't give you the full number, but the area code is the same residential district where our firm has 2 private family contracts. High net worth residential area." He stood up. "I've been helpful enough. He left. Jihan and Chitty sat at the table. The river moved behind them, dark and quiet. Street food smoke drifted across from the stalls nearby. Chitty said, "Residential district. Private family contract." Sujin was the one at the mall, but someone with connections arranged that security guard and made that call. He paused. "Yihun. Who do you know in that residential area with the kind of connections to have a private security contract?" Jihan stared at the river. He knew exactly who. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I need to see the footage first." They watched it at Chitty's apartment. 3 angles. 14 minutes of footage. Jihan watched it once all the way through without speaking. Then he watched it again. On the second watch he paused it at the moment Sujin crouched down next to Ava's face. And he stared at the frame for a full minute. Then he closed the laptop. Chitty said, "Jihan." Jihan said, "I know." Chitty said, "We need to talk about who made that call." Jihan said, "I know who made the call." Chitty said his name quietly. Jihan stood up. He walked to the window of Chitty's apartment and looked out at the street below. Saturday night in Seoul was still going. People moving between restaurants and bars. Couples walking. Groups of young people in bright jackets. The ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care that his life had just rearranged itself around a new center of gravity. If you're still here, following Jihan and Ava's journey and eager to know what happens next, I truly need your support. I'm putting everything into this story, and your subscription makes all the difference. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts on what's coming next, let me know where you're watching from and the time, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. If you don't subscribe now, you'll miss the most thrilling part of the story, and you might regret it. Don't let that be you.